I have no idea how long I ran. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. When my legs finally gave out, I collapsed in the underbrush. I lay there panting like a fish out of water, trying to force myself back onto my feet. I fell in and out of consciousness, shivering through the coldest hours of the night. I had no shelter and nothing left in me to keep me going. I was exhausted and barely functioning. I managed to crawl a bit further, only to roll down the side of a hill. I ended up in a ditch next to a dirt road. That's where I blacked out completely. Now, I'm not sure exactly what happened next. I have a vague memory of a barking dog, followed by frantic yelling. Someone checked my pulse, and I was carried into a vehicle, possibly an ambulance. Someone kept talking to me, but I didn't understand what they were saying. In my mind, all I could hear was Fred's mad cackling. Falling unconscious, if anything, was a blessing. No more fear. It was like closing and opening my eyes. No passage of time. When I opened my eyes, I thought I was back at John's place. It wasn't the first time I'd woken up with a white light stinging my eyes, except for this was a hospital, not John's spare guest room. That, and John wasn't there to meet me. God knows what happened to him. But I wasn't alone. The man sitting across from me was in his early 50s, dressed in a blue shirt with black tie and black jeans, with a pocket protector and 2 types of pens. I got the impression he'd been sitting there for a while. He was tapping away at a small foldable laptop. Once I brought my eyes into focus, he looked up and adjusted his square glasses. "Good morning," he said. "Can I get you something?" "No, sorry." "What? Where am I?" "A worried passerby called the police. The police brought you here, and then someone called us." "Us?" I asked. "So you're not with the police?" "No." He smiled. "I'm your uncle's former employer." I was put through a number of basic tests, starting with blood pressure, blood levels, and my reflexes. At one point, I could see the man in the blue shirt having a long conversation with one of the nurses, pointing at my charts and openly discussing my health. Who the hell were these people? From what I'd seen, Hatchet Pharmaceuticals, or Hatchet Investments, or Hatchet Biotechnica, were all different names for the same thing. A bunch of deep pockets who owned half the town. You could throw a rock at anything in Tomskog, and you'd find their little blue sunflower logo firmly printed on it. Even there, I could see it. A watermark on print paper. A faded logo on the fire detectors. Hatchet Pharmaceuticals, or the Hatchet Men, were synonymous with the town itself. Once my results came back, the man with the blue shirt sat down to speak with me in private. "I understand you've suffered a blood poisoning these past few months," he said. "Why haven't you sought out medical attention?" "My uncle helped me," I said. "He kept it in check." "Are you sure? This is easily treatable. We can get it out of you in a few days." "Wait. No transfusions or, dialysis?" The man looked at me, dumbfounded. He stifled a chuckle and adjusted his glasses. "No, that, shouldn't be necessary," He got out of his seat and held out a hand. "I'm Hank, by the way," he said. "Hank Dudley." Pretty much everyone seemed to know Hank. They waved at him, greeted him by name, and asked him about his day. Turns out he had some sort of informal position at the hospital, but formally he was a liaison for the Hatchet Group. He didn't make a secret of it. I was about to fill out some forms for my release, but Hank just waved it off. "No need," he said. "I get the sense that you value your privacy." I nodded. At that point, I just wanted to get out of there. Hank followed me outside, and we got a moment to ourselves. He didn't seem particularly forceful, and I had plenty of opportunity to just walk away. Still, I felt a bit indebted to him. He'd made sure I was treated well. It didn't seem all that bad. "Do you have a place to stay?" Hank asked. "Not right now," I admitted. "My uncle, he's out of town." "We figured. Are you going to be okay on your own?" I didn't know. I didn't know what to do, or where to go. The question was surprisingly hard to answer. "Look," Hank said, "I know what's going on. I know what you're doing, and I know you're in danger. I know some people who can keep an eye out and give you some space to breathe. Maybe give you a chance to just wait it all out." "That's, awfully convenient," I chuckled. "Sounds a bit too good to be true." "Well, I know some people who'd love to talk to you," he continued. "And that's very valuable to us." I thought about it. I figured that a conversation couldn't hurt. Hank pulled up in his car, nothing particularly fancy, a modest mid-range Toyota. Overall, I got the impression that Hank didn't seem to be much different from the other people in town. It was easy to forget that he was one of the infamous hatchet men. "We have a facility not too far from here," Hank said. "That should get you off the radar." "When you say facility, you mean..." "Honestly, it's more like containment. It sounds bad, but that's all there is to it. We contain things, both to keep them safe and to keep things safe from them. If you need to get out of the spotlight for a while, it's the perfect place to go." "And I can leave at any time? No questions asked?" "Sure," Frank shrugged, "but we might not be able to guarantee your safety." He sat up straight and adjusted his glasses. "Look," he said, "the Yearwalk is something we've wanted to study. The reason we haven't is because it is extremely dangerous, and not many people undertake it willingly. That you've survived this long is interesting, and we'd love to see what happens if you go through with it. So I'm a bit of a curiosity?" "That's a good word for it." We found our way out to an airstrip. This large patch of land lined with fences and barbed wire. Hank got us past a checkpoint, across the airstrip, and to a small set of office buildings. Nothing fancy, and nothing strange. Just a bunch of eggshell white one-story buildings. If anything, it looked a little creepy. The road wasn't even paved. Maybe it ought to just look good for the satellites. Hank parked his car and showed me inside. The interior was a completely different story. Fluorescent lights and concrete floors, open spaces, some sort of metal piping on the walls, some warm, some cold, some neutral. some sort of railing to allow people to feel their way forward in the dark. There were colored lines across the floor, but no signs. If you didn't know, you just didn't know. But looking straight forward, something particular caught my eye. A cargo lift, and at least a dozen buttons. 12 basement levels? How deep was this place? Hank noticed my side eye. This is just the surface level building. It stretches pretty far underground. You're not just gonna put me in some moldy basement, right? 'Cause I wouldn't want... No, chuckled Hank. Your main sleeping quarter will be on level 2, but you're free to come and go as you like. What about my phone? Internet access? You're just gonna let me do whatever? Alright, let's get real for a sec, Hank interrupted. From the moment you woke up, you've been heavily monitored. Everything you say, you do, and some extent think, is actively being translated and analyzed. Some of the stuff we can do is going to be beyond your comprehension. And yes, our number one priority is to the safety of our staff and interests. But you are part of that. He put a hand on my shoulder. And as long as you're not actively harming us, we'll do everything in our power, not just to keep you safe, but comfortable. If you play ball, you're going to be fine. If you don't, we got ways to protect ourselves. I appreciated it. Someone just talking to me like a real person, showing me their cards. Even so, there was a tinge of threat in protect ourselves that didn't sit quite right with me. But for the time being, I just nodded. So let's talk about my time with Hatchet. That set of buildings were just one of 10 connected sites. Underground tunnels stretched for miles underneath, and the lower levels were a complete mystery. This was the facility closest to Tomskog, but there were facilities that stretched all the way to the state line. This place had been built under the guise of bomb shelters back in the 40s. Reinforced during the Cold War, and kept modernized and supplied for years. The thing about Hatchet is that while most of their income comes from patients and pharmaceuticals, they have a surprisingly large general manufacturing industry. Some of it is overseas, but most of it is wholly domestic. They make everything from paper towels to wall paneling. They got subsidiaries for everything. And the paper trail goes far deeper than 12 levels. The second floor, at least at this part of the facility, was employee housing. 4 rooms, a bathroom, and a kitchen. In lieu of windows, there were large ambient light screens plastered on the walls, simulating a day and night cycle. White wooden wall panels, rubber flooring, and solid concrete ceilings. Not the homiest kind of feeling. It was more like living in a fancy basement. They were also adamant about fire safety, keeping fire detectors, sprinklers, and extinguishers in every room. Temperature-controlled shower and bathtub, fully stocked kitchen with a digital assistant for ordering groceries, living room, bedroom, a small office, and a storage room. The place was immaculate. It is easy to get into a routine when you're feeling comfortable, and Hank put me at ease. I took up jogging around the airstrip once per day. I got back online in the office. Just getting to sit down and check on all my socials was a strange feeling after all this time barely scraping by. Sure, I was being monitored, but I didn't get the sense that it was nefarious. Hank would drop by every other day, sometimes on his own, sometimes with people. He'd also get me whatever groceries I ordered, bringing it all in brandless containers in a plain paper bag. Sometimes it'd be so fresh that the edges of the plastic were still warm from the cutter. And we'd talk. We recorded interviews about everything I experienced over the past few months. I told them everything. Everything from the uncomfortable snake-like creature that called me Little Wheat to Fred. They took intense notes, asked a lot of follow-up questions, and asked me to go into vivid detail. Skin textures, smells, intonations in voices. Everything that could be broken down into pieces and analyzed. I got the impression that Hank was just a face. The real people working these facilities were practical people. Even the interviewers talking to me were laser-focused, prepared, and continuously asked me to clarify things. When I couldn't, they'd ask me to draw things, use metaphors, or just focus on my personal experience. Whatever information they could wring out of me, like a wet towel, they did. I don't have a lot of bad things to say about my time at Hatchet. They were courteous, and no one stopped me from just coming and going as I pleased. Hell, Frank gave me a ride into town on a few occasions. I was allowed to make any phone call I wanted, talk to anyone, and pretty much do whatever. Still, I had that feeling that if I stepped over the line, the consequences would be dire. I had no intention of doing so. Why would I? As July crossed into August, I didn't mind staying there. The questions were down from once a day to once a week, but they were still going to keep me around. These were people who were in the know. They knew of the entities I described. They didn't bat an eye about headless bodies or alternate dimensions. If anything, it seemed to excite them. I could see myself sticking around, at least until the end of the year. One morning, as I went to take a jog around the airstrip, the weather had turned into a downpour. Still, I had to get some fresh air. I love being out in the rain anyway. So I took a cargo lift, walked through the corridor, and out the front door. I was immediately hit by a gust of wind, and it really was pouring outside. It struck me as a bit strange that I hadn't seen any others. Most of the time there were people rushing up and down the cargo lift, but so far I hadn't seen anyone. A lot of people worked remotely, but this was odd. Quiet. And it got even odder as I stepped outside. I could see at least a dozen people standing on the airstrip in the middle of the downpour. I recognized some of them from the nearby area. Interviewers, security guards, truck drivers, maintenance workers, electricians. But it was the person I didn't recognize that stood out to me the most. She was a young woman with a black pixie haircut and a gray hoodie long enough to reach her knees. Black mascara ran from the corner of her eyes as she looked straight up into the dark clouds. The others seemed to do the same, keeping their mouths wide open to gather up the rain. Even from 50 feet, I could see that they didn't blink. Raindrops just kept tapping away at their open eyes. My phone beeped, something inconsequential. An update or notification. Maybe a new post by a YouTuber. Either way, it turned heads. It started with just one of them, one of the truck drivers. He turned his head my way. Without looking down from the sky, it's as if his head and body moved independently of one another. He took a fumbling step towards me, careful not to spill any rain he'd collected in his mouth. Moments later, the others followed suit. Then in unison, they started running, haphazardly throwing themselves to the wind, forcing their bodies forward with complete abandon, arms flailing, bodies and necks twisted and turning like they were being dragged forward. All I heard from them were these uncomfortable gurgling sounds as the rainwater reached all the way into their lungs. I ran back inside, trying my best to lock the door. I didn't have any door codes, and the panel made little sense to me. I abandoned the idea and just ran back towards the cargo lift. I pressed the 2 button over and over, hoping against hope that I'd been quick enough, and I could hear the front door sliding open, the wet feet smacking against the floor. They were inside, looking for me. But the cargo lift moved, and I went down. I checked my phone. I usually had coverage, even underground, one of the many oddities of the Hatchet site. I tried calling Hank, but I got nothing. I tried to call the guard at the front gate, but I got nothing. Finally, as I just tried calling the police, my phone disconnected completely. Seemed that the filters they'd put in were still in effect. But hey, at least I was safe. Then the doors opened. Turns out, there's a problem with having sprinklers installed in every corridor, especially if there's something wrong with the water. I looked down the level 2 corridor, only to see the sprinklers going wild. The lights had turned to an emergency red. Still, there was no alarm, no blaring sirens, just a low electric hum as the lights struggled to go on and off, on and off, on and off. It was hard to see, but the water was slightly darker than usual. There was a viscosity to it, making it clump and pool. I could see it dripping out of the sprinklers, or clogging them completely in places. I tried to go lower, but the lift allowed me only 2 spaces, level 2 or topside. I pressed myself to the back of the cargo lift, trying to remember to breathe. I thought this place would be safe. The world outside was where the dangers lurked. This place was supposed to be a sanctuary. If a group like Hatchet can't keep things straight, who the hell can? I could hear shuffling movement further in, and no one seemed in a hurry to leave, which in of itself was worrying. I hid around the corner of the cargo lift and just listened. I could hear shuffling feet, gargling, and wet fabric flapping back and forth. I didn't need to look to know. Whatever was happening up there was happening down here as well. I held my breath, waiting for whoever roamed the halls to pass by. I had to shield myself from the sprinklers. Whatever this was came from the water. I took off my shirt and wrapped it around my face like a mask. I couldn't see, but if I could just make it into my room, I could take shelter and get my bearings. Luckily, there was these pipes along the wall. I thought about them a lot, and I knew my room was on the left side, following a cold pipe with a round mark on it. I tried to listen more than to look. I felt the cold water running over me, and I could hear shuffling footsteps down the connecting hallways. Every now and then I could hear a gargle over the pouring water, and I'd stop dead in my tracks. Eventually, I made my way back to my room. I hurried through the door, closed it behind me, and almost wept out of relief. The sprinklers here were turned off. I could breathe for a while. I tore my shirt off. Even here, there were red emergency lights blinking. My phone was completely offline. Same for the desktop computer in my office. I was stuck down here, There was no way I could get out topside. I had to find another way out. There were several exits. That much I knew. It could be miles of tunnels between them, but they were there. I didn't have any idea how far this had spread, but whatever containment they'd worked on obviously failed. I didn't care much for how or why. I packed my bag, bottled water, some snacks, 2 fresh sets of clothes, a charger for my phone, but I didn't know what to do against the water. I went through the kitchen 2 times, only stopping once when I heard a noise outside. My heart jumped into my throat. I'm not claustrophobic, but if anything would make me one, it'd be being stuck down there in the flowing water. Using a baseball cap with a blue sunflower logo, I wrapped my head in layers of cellophane. I stuffed a water bottle with dish towels, using it as a makeshift filter. I had no idea if this thing was airborne or not, but I wasn't taking any chances. I'd come too far. Finally, I considered a weapon. A kitchen knife would be the obvious choice, but those things can get slippery. I needed something with a bit more power. I finally settled on prying off a metal leg from the kitchen table. It was about as long as my arm, and sturdy as all hell. At the very least, I could push them away with it. I put on my jacket and took a deep breath. I could have used a comforting voice then. John telling me he knew what was going on, and how to fix it. Evan watching my back, tearing monsters to pieces if necessary. I didn't know what those things outside were, and what they were doing to people. But whatever it was bad. I stepped back into the hallway, prepared for a long walk. The sprinklers were still going strong. Some of the red lights were dying, leaving only a handful of them blinking in various intensities. Emergency lights were meant to last for hours. Something was wrong. At first, I wasn't shocked to see another person in the hallway. It took me a moment to recognize her. The black pixie haircut, the long gray hoodie, the running mascara. Black water dripped out of the edges of her mouth as her neck swiveled back and forth like a bobblehead. For a moment, we just looked at one another. She looked tired. Her sunken brown eyes and colorless lips spoke volumes. She was shivering, cold, and barely standing up. And yet, she had no trouble charging straight at me. She wasn't alone. At least a dozen people scrambling to get past her started chasing me down the hallway. I'd followed the hallway the other way once, but everything looked different in the dark. I tried to keep track of the various colors and pipes, but I got the lines mixed up. Blue and green doesn't look that different in dark red. I could hear them slipping and climbing over one another, wet skin slapping against rubber and concrete, little moans and groans as their bodies struggled to push the water out. I turned left, only to run straight into one of them. An old man, some kind of maintenance worker, still holding his toolbox, staring straight up at the sprinklers, letting the dark water fill his open mouth. I bumped into him, seeing water spill over from the corner of his mouth. He turned his head down and let the water set in his cheek, staring at me with bloodshot eyes. I could barely see through the cellophane. The water and the reflection from the red lights made it difficult, but I'll never forget those bloodshot eyes. There was no recognition of one person to another. Cold fingers wrapped around my arms, but I just put my table leg into his torso and pushed. It was surprisingly effective, forcing him back and sending him sprawling to the floor. Footsteps were approaching, and I had to keep going. He hurried to get to me, spilling black water on the floor. He got as far as grazing my shoe with his fingertips before I was gone. I hurried down the hallway, only stopping occasionally to catch my breath and to make sure I wasn't running into something worse. Finally, I ended up in a long tunnel, wide enough for 2 trucks to pass one another. This place was enormous, probably some kind of Cold War infrastructure project. There were no sprinklers here, but there were plenty of people. Most of them were standing with their heads turned up, as to not spill any water from their mouths. So long as I kept myself low and quiet, they couldn't see me. Still, as little as a bump could send them off into a rage. Crawling on all fours, I kept going forward. I had trouble breathing through my makeshift filter, and the cellophane made crinkling noises. I had to take it off so they couldn't hear me. I just had to hope this wasn't widespread enough to catch me off guard down the line. I heard some of them shift and turn. One leaned down to grab my leg, only to stop once the water in his mouth started spilling over. He groaned in pain, frustrated not to catch me. They were out of their element, but it was clear they were not done pursuing me. If anything, they still knew perfectly well that I was there. Some of them were slowly moving my way, following me down the vast tunnel. Then the emergency lights went dark. I had to move forward in complete darkness, occasionally bumping into something, sometimes a person, other times a wall or a crate. Gargles and movements in the dark, fingers grasping at me, explosive movement like a frightened dog at every turn. There had to be a light somewhere. There had to be an end of this tunnel. A notification on my phone. God damn it! I was sure I turned it off. God fucking damn it! I pull it up and put on a flashlight. I could see dozens of them, closing their mouths and staring right at me. Bloodshot eyes reflecting in the pale cell phone light. They were coming for me with everything they got. I burst into a sprint, tackling a man to get past. My backpack was grabbed by an older woman, and I just let her have it. I tore myself free from grasping fingers and just kept going, fingernails taking every opportunity to dig into my skin. Gargles and stifled gag reflexes echoed down the tunnel, giving me no chance to stop. Faces covered in black water passed me by, reflecting off my cell phone flashlight, hands outstretched, reaching for me. Finally, there was a green shine. Not at the end of the tunnel, but a small door on the left. A service entrance. I beelined for it, almost slipping on the corner of a plastic tarp. Catching myself by the door, I took one look back, only to see this sea of people still coming for me. A young woman with a black pixie haircut and a long gray hoodie standing at the very front. I yanked the door open and just kept running. My lungs were burning. Hadn't it been for my daily jog routine, I'd be dead. I noticed the lights seemingly guiding me forward. A light showing me to turn left, to stop, to hurry, intense blinking or sudden darkness. It was all communicative. Someone was watching, helping me get out. I made it all the way to another cargo lift, a small one, mainly used for repairs and maintenance staff. Then again, there was no way to tell how long I'd been running. I just pressed the button for the surface and sank down at the back of the elevator, catching my breath. A drop of water hit my eye. I freaked out, screaming and tearing at my face to get it out. It took me a few seconds to realize I was fine. It was just condensation. Just water. That's all there was to it. As soon as the door opened, I saw Hank Dudley, this time with a gun pointed at me. The friendliness in his face had faded.
"Get up,"
he scowled.
"On your feet."
"Hank?" I said. What are you? He smacked me across the face with his gun. In my confusion, he grabbed me by the shirt and pulled me along, pushing me in front of him.
This was the plan, huh?
He chuckled.
You people. You fucking people.
I was taken outside. It looked like an administration building for some sort of logging site. A dirt road stretched far into the pine woods, and I could taste sawdust in the air, even after the rain. The rain had stopped, luckily. Not so luckily, Hank pushed me forward with the butt of his gun. I fell to my knees, feeling the barrel push against the back of my head. Maybe this was it. Maybe it wouldn't be the strange and unnatural taking me out. Maybe it'd be just an old-fashioned, all-American handgun.
We were going to take care of you,
Hank said.
We were dealing with this together, and this is what you do.
I don't know. What'd I do?
I'm not a fucking idiot, Digman.
A kick to my back. I fell forward, rolled over, so I could face my attacker. Hank had his gun pointed straight at me.
Your fucking family is a menace. If Galapagos had even hinted at you needing a purge, you'd be fucking dust in the fucking wind. I'd be looking at your fucking face in an ashtray.
He kicked me, breaking something in my stomach.
How did you get past the security checkpoints?
He screamed.
How did you get past the encryption? You can barely fucking type.
I do, okay? I groaned. I didn't...
Funny,
he chuckled, kicking me again and again.
Funny, so funny.
I tasted blood. There was a click. Then nothing. For a moment I thought I might be dead. But there was no pain. There was nothing. Not even a blast. In fact, the gun didn't seem to fire at all. Hank kept clicking over and over. Nothing happened. Hank's gun had something called a biometric safety trigger. Just a simple RFID identifier, made to ensure that only the right person could fire the gun. I had no idea about this at the time, but it seemed that it didn't want to work all of a sudden. Hank threw his gun to the side, picking up my table leg.
Digman,
he growled.
You fucking...
Then a gunshot. This time, not aimed at me. I covered my ears as another 3 rounds rang out. Hank Dudley collapsed next to me, joining me in the dirt, his mouth wide open and his eyes wild. A dead man catching the last drops of rainwater on his tongue. An outstretched hand pulled me back to my feet as a pair of arms wrapped around me. I'd recognize Uncle John and his strange hair anywhere.
Are you okay?
John asked, stroking my hair.
Did they hurt you?
You did this?
Well, yeah,
John shrugged.
Containment doesn't breach itself.
You did this? You killed people? John pulled back, looking me in the eye. We had the same baseball cap.
I know it looks bad,
he said,
but they had no intention of ever letting you go.
Somewhere in the distance, there was a siren.
There's a reason I left these people,
John continued.
And right now, you just have to trust me.
And once again, I grabbed his outstretched hand.